Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well wherever you are. So I had a request through my Instagram page to kind of talk around this topic of toxic masculinity and male mental health. So let's talk about that. So usually on my channel things are quite general. I sometimes talk about kids' mental health a lot. I don't tend to go male, female or make things that distinct. I'm quite general about the things I cover. But because I had this request, I thought I would specifically talk about male mental health. And I suppose I have also talked about postnatal depression and female mental health quite a bit. So that's where we are today. First off, let's talk about what is toxic masculinity. It's a term that's getting bandied around a bit at the moment. So to go into what toxic masculinity is, it is the idea that there is an ideal way to be a man, basically. So it's a very stereotyped view of what it means to be a man. It's open to interpretation, but it generally runs along the lines of being a big, strong protector, not showing emotions, looking after a partner or children, providing for them. It can also mean things like being the main breadwinner, having the main income in a home, that kind of look. And I'm very wary of stereotyping in that way because basically everybody's interpretation of that will be different, but it is this kind of understanding that there is an ideal way to be as a man in the world. With toxic masculinity, there's no kind of room for a man to have mental health issues. And actually, statistically, men are at greater risk of suicide than women. And people have linked that to this idea of toxic masculinity and how men aren't allowed to have emotions because they have to be strong and look after everyone all the time, so they're not allowed to have emotions. So this links in with the next bit where I'm going to talk about mental health, basically. So if you haven't seen my video around emotional regulation, check it out. But basically, when we aren't allowed as children to run our full emotional cycles and regulate our own emotions, it can lead us to believe that there are set ways to be. Now, with men in particular, things like don't cry is such a very common thing for people to tell children. You know, big boys don't cry. You know, suck it up, you're a man. You got to be a big tough guy now. All of these types of things are really, really common to say to young boys. And I don't think people quite realise the effect of these very small comments, but coming from lots of different angles, lots of different places, constantly coming in, and how that can shape a person. And in terms of risks mental health wise for men, those types of attitudes and those types of conditioning and upbringing can lead men to really consider that a lot of the way that they feel is not acceptable. So the idea of a man breaking down crying over something, they're perceived as weak. You know, they are meant to protect their family and instead they're struggling, so they can really judge themselves for it. There can be a hell of a lot of self-judgment and difficulties with expressing to people as well, because if a man feels like they have to keep up this image all the time, then things like, if for example it's a heterosexual man who's married with a family, he may not necessarily seek support for his mental health problems because he's meant to be the one that's the strong protector of the family. So he might not necessarily speak to his partner about the issues that he's having, and even going and seeking support from another friend or from a mental health service or anything like that. There's a huge amount of self-judgment that's involved with that. So those men are less likely to actually seek support, and they're more likely to try and struggle on their own and to feel like they're broken. And again, I've covered a video about feeling broken and where that comes from. But toxic masculinity can be massively damaging on more than just an individual level too, because the idea that men are a certain way also fuels a lot of industry. So for example, if you look at the health and fitness industry, men being big, strong guys can really affect the self-esteem issues of other guys who are not naturally 6'5" or whatever. You know, it can be really, really difficult to grow up in a society where you don't meet this expectation. So not just on like a physical sense either, but if, for example, if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community and you are assigned male at birth, it can be very, very difficult when you don't meet the norms of what a man should be. That can be an additional consideration in mental health in those young people. And it also feeds into the gender stereotypes and what a guy should be and what a woman should be. And it stops people allowing to just be themselves. So if those stereotypes didn't exist, then there would be a lot more acceptance of people to just be curious about who they were and how they felt they were and all of those types of things. What I would say though specifically about toxic masculinity and why it can be so difficult is that toxic masculinity also involves the notion that there is this dominance of men, and it largely stems from the patriarchy, but this dominant behavior and this dominant mindset can lead to, in certain circumstances, the dismissal of women or children or other people. It can lead to projecting, and it can lead to very fixed ideals on what is right and what is wrong. Over time, like historically as well, if you look at the development of psychiatry, for example, there's a very large feminist movement around the development of the mental health system. And the reason why is because there is an argument that the mental health system was developed as a means for men to control women. So women have historically been seen as emotional and irrational. Now, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Being emotional does not make you irrational. Like, you can be very rational and emotional. However, because of how things have developed over time, that's tended to be the stereotype that's come in, is that if you're an emotional person, you're crazy, you're irrational. Now, in terms of the development of the mental health system, that has resulted in, historically, women were sectioned more often. Women were put in asylums because they were seen as irrational human beings. Now, the notion that things needed to be rational comes from the Industrial Revolution and those ideas being prioritized. If you look back further than that, in literature, in art, in most creative outlets, you can see examples of people struggling with mental health. Look back in any of Shakespeare's plays, you can quite clearly see male characters struggling with various mental health issues as well as female. But this notion of this very rational, stoic man developed. And it can be very, very difficult for a number of reasons, because that fixed mindset around what a man can be can also lead to a very fixed mindset on what a woman can be, instead of seeing people as just people, which can lead to difficulties in terms of in relationships and relationship building, in how you parent and how you are with friends. Now, you can actually make your mental health problems, if you have them, worse, because largely our mental health problems, although they do stem from difficulties with the environment and things that we're managing and all of that type of things, a huge amount of additional pressure is pressure that we put on ourselves. So it's judgment over how we feel, it's pressure to feel a different way than how we feel, and it's not validating how we feel within ourselves. Now, if you have very strong views on what a man should be and how a man should behave, then that is going to hugely impact your mental health and your feelings and your well-being when things just crop up and you don't feel that way. So if, for example, something really upsets you, but you've learned that men can't cry, then you are not going to be able to manage that upset, and you're likely going to judge yourself hugely for even feeling that way and just push it away. Now, if the emotional cycle is not allowed to regulate, if you're not allowed to feel your feelings, they will just stick around, and that's when you're more likely to, as I said before, men are at greater risk of suicide, and men are also at greater risk of things like breakdowns. Like, it doesn't go away, it will stay somewhere, it will remain within you, those emotions, if you can't feel them. I don't think for a second that me making a video on YouTube is going to magically make these ideas of toxic masculinity disappear, but what I would say is that they exist out there, like they are an environmental conditioning that's coming on you. They're not an intrinsic part of who you are as a human being. There is no set mold of, I have given birth to this male human who now has to be the protector, the provider, the stoic, and all of these things. Like, they are things that are put on you externally. They're not a fundamental part of who you are. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with wanting to be any of those traits whatsoever if you feel that that aligns with you. But if, for example, you are basically shitting on yourself for how you feel in certain situations, and if you're not seeking support when you need it, and if you don't feel like you can be yourself and be true to who you are, and if you are judging yourself for being who you naturally are, then this is where we end up in a kind of vortex of male mental health issues. And this is why there are so many campaigns now aimed towards men around it being okay to feel how you feel. You know, there are celebrities that are coming out making documentaries about their mental health concerns. There are many initiatives where men in prominent positions are being more open, purely to try and highlight that every man struggles and that it's okay, and that this stigma around how men should and shouldn't behave needs to change because it's damaging. From a professional point of view, the hardest thing is when you are sitting opposite a man who is quite clearly struggling and they come to you for support, which is wonderful, but they don't then feel able to seek support from other people in their life because this prevailing, I should be able to do this, I should be able to do that, I cannot let people in on this, I can't let them see this real inability to be vulnerable, which is something that men are not meant to be vulnerable in terms of from a toxic masculinity point of view. And if there is such a dismissiveness around that ability to be vulnerable with other people and to be supported, and there are various things preventing that, then that's really, really sad. And as a side note, toxic masculinity and those very rigid ideals of what people should and shouldn't be can also be a massive contributing factor in abuse situations. So generally, toxic masculinity is a real problem, and we know that men do suffer from mental health issues. We know that men don't feel like they can seek support. So me saying like it's okay not to be okay is like the tip of the iceberg. Like, it's a real issue in our society at the moment with male mental health and trying to focus services towards men so men can get support for their mental health. But I would say if you are a guy watching this, firstly, know that however you feel is okay. Like, it's okay to feel whatever. Also, if you are a man who has a grip of your mental health, I would strongly say that especially in these times, at this moment, supporting other men and being able to be real around other men with how you feel will enable other men to also feel real about how they feel. Like, it's a domino effect, isn't it? Like, the more men that can be open and honest about their mental health struggles, that can feel able to be themselves, the more other men will feel able to be themselves. And yeah, I don't know if that video has been helpful. I feel like I've rambled a lot, so I'm sorry if it hasn't made a huge amount of sense, but that's my video for today. I hope that wherever you are, you're keeping safe and well. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will catch you in the next one.